Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the Kalinsky Academy. And in today's video, we're going to be looking at negative feedback. This is a progression from the last video that we've done, where we looked at the glands, we looked at the hormones, and we looked at the functions of each hormone and where each and every gland is situated in the body. And today we're going to be looking at homeostasis. Now, homeostasis, as we've already mentioned, it's basically the process by which our bodies are capable of maintaining a constant internal environment. Okay, so when we're referring to constant internal environment, we are referring to an environment where a lot of processes take place. Okay, for example, digestion takes place. You also have temperature, so your body is able to keep a constant internal environment with regards to temperature. So there's going to be quite a few processes that we're going to look at today. And basically, negative feedback plays a huge role in the process of homeostasis, because essentially negative feedback is when an imbalance, as you can see over here, is detected, and eventually you would want the process to stop secreting certain substances to allow other substances to also start secreting substances if it's necessary, in order for your body to basically maintain homeostasis. Okay, so just to give you guys a nice summary over here, we have the first step is that how does negative feedback work? So the first step would involve an imbalance that is detected by the receptor, right? So any process in your body, right? So for example, if we look at the body's ability to respond to a stimulus, okay? So for example, if you have a high amount of glucose in your blood, right after eating, maybe let's say a very high energy snack, for example, okay? So then your glucose levels are going to basically rise. It's going to increase, and that's basically causing an imbalance, right? So you'll have receptor cells that are present in your blood that will detect that there's something wrong. So that basically it will send a signal to indicate or basically signal that something is wrong, right? And then so then that's the first step, an imbalance detected, and then a control center is stimulated, right? So depending on where the certain substance that will need to be secreted, or certain hormone that will need to be secreted, whether it's in the hypothalamus or any area where it can secrete hormones, right? That would be the control center. So then it will be stimulated, and then the control center will then respond. Okay, so now how will the control center respond, right? So it will send a message, right? And this normally involves the hormones. The hormones will then, because remember, hormones are considered to be chemical messengers, right? So a message will then be sent to the target organ, right? To basically send a message to the target organ to say that, something's wrong, and we need to do something about it. So the hormones will then try to reach the target organ, so that the target organs could be, for example, glands, right? For example, adrenal gland. The adrenal gland can then secrete a certain hormone, for example, aldosterone or adrenaline. Okay, and those are in most cases, well, in all cases, it's the effectors, okay, because then they're going to help with generating a response. And then step 5, the effector responds, and once it responds, that's now when something changes. It opposes or reverses the imbalance, right? So then it's going to basically secrete more or less of a hormone in order to basically maintain homeostasis, depending on what process you are actually looking at. Okay, and then lastly, balance will then be restored. Okay, so here's a nice little diagram to show you basically, this is a seesaw, or some of you guys call it a I don't know what you guys call it when you guys were young, when you used to play on these seesaws, but we normally call it a seesaw. And as you can see, if the seesaw bends on one side, all right, then this signifies that, you know, there's an imbalance. So it's not balanced on this pivot that you see over here, right? So this is the pivot, that triangle, and it needs to balance on the pivot. So if it's equal, or if it's right on top of the pivot and there's no bending, right, then it means basically that it's balanced, right? Whereas it leans on one side, then there's going to be an imbalance. But then our body has the amazing way of restoring that balance through responding with the help of receptor cells, and then addressing the control center to do something about it, and basically sending the message to the effector organs to secrete a certain hormone or substance to basically maintain balance. All right, so this is basically a summary of how negative feedback actually works. Okay, so in today's video, we're going to be looking at 6 processes, okay, in our bodies that undergoes the process of negative feedback. And it's going to be important because negative feedback, it needs to occur. So negative feedback often refers to when something, a secretion, needs to either stop producing, a gland needs to either stop producing or secreting a certain substance to allow for balance to occur, or to secrete less of a substance, or to secrete more of a substance in order to maintain balance. That's why it's called negative. Think of it like this: if we have an over secretion of, let's say, let's look at, for example, glucose, right? So if you have an over secretion of glucose in our blood, right, and nothing is preventing that glucose from entering our blood, right, then that's an over secretion, meaning it will cause a positive feedback loop where glucose will endlessly be secreted into your blood, and nothing is removing it, and that can cause a lot of problems like diabetes, and obviously we wouldn't want that. All right, so that's why at some point the secretion needs to stop. Okay, the gland needs to stop producing a certain substance, depending on what it is, in order to allow for maybe another substance to secrete something, so that balance can be maintained, or another gland to secrete something. Okay, so we're going to look at water, and water involves the process of osmoregulation, as we discussed in the previous video. So if you guys haven't watched the previous video, go check it out. It's called the endocrine system. And so we're going to look at the osmoregulation with regards to water. Osmosis refers to water and the regulation of water. Okay, and then we're also going to look at salts. Now, salts are basically examples of salts is potassium ions and sodium ions that are present in your body. Okay, and you need them for certain metabolic functions. And we're also going to discuss how is our body able to regulate these salts, okay, to ensure that there's a balance of water and a balance of salt. Okay, and we're also going to look at temperature. How is our body able to undergo a certain temperature? And also thyroxin. Now, thyroxin is basically another hormone that is produced by the thyroid gland. Okay, thyroid gland. And basically the thyroid gets stimulated by the hormone which is produced by the pituitary gland, which is TSH. Okay, so TSH will stimulate the thyroid gland to produce thyroxin, which is a hormone that's very important for maintaining your metabolic rate. Okay, so basically our whole body has metabolic functions, okay, whether it's the digestion, whether it's the your heart rate, how often your heart beats, how fast it beats, your heart rate, or any other process. that's basically a metabolic process, and all of it needs thyroxine, okay, in order to function properly. So if you lack thyroxine, then it will interfere with those normal metabolic processes, okay. And then also going to look at carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is, we refer to carbon dioxide with the, because remember, if we have carbon dioxide in our blood, okay, from grade 10, we've learned that if we have carbon dioxide in our blood can then become acidic, right? So it can lower the pH in our blood, and then that's basically an imbalance that we don't necessarily want. Okay, so we're going to look at how is our body able to balance carbon dioxide, okay? Because remember, if you look at your respiratory tract, you ingest, while you breathe in carbon dioxide, and you also release or breathe out. You breathe in oxygen, and then you release carbon dioxide from it will be diffused into your alveolar, from your alveolar sacs back into, so that you can breathe it out, okay, where gaseous exchange will occur. So carbon dioxide is a waste product, okay, and it will be released to breathe out because it's a toxic substance for our body. Our body doesn't like carbon dioxide, although we need it for certain functions. So there needs to be a balance of carbon dioxide in our body, okay? And then we have glucose, which I've already discussed, and it involves the pancreas. And we're going to look at what the pancreas secretes, okay, in order to balance glucose as well. So these are the six processes that needs negative feedback to occur. Okay, so let's quickly discuss all those feedback loops for each one of them, negative feedback. So we're going to start with osmoregulation, which is the balance of water. Now, here's a nice a diagram, or a simple diagram that basically summarizes the whole process of osmoregulation. Okay, so A represents when there is a decrease of water in the body. Okay, when there's a decrease of water in the body, and B represents when there's an increase of water in the body. Okay, now remember I said that in the last video we looked at the hormones that play a role in water balance, right? Or osmoregulation are basically ADH, okay? So ADH is an antidiuretic hormone, and ADH is, its main function is to try to balance the water levels in our body, okay? So when our body doesn't want to get rid of water, the antidiuretic hormone will be stimulated. So think of, for example, if you are sleeping at night, right? Your antidiuretic hormone is basically being activated when you are very pressed, but you don't feel like getting out of bed to actually go and urinate. Then the antidiuretic hormone will then be stimulated so that you can still control the urine in your body, right? Even though you want to go in, even though you are pressed, but not so pressed that you feel like you want to go to the bathroom, okay? And then only when you wake up, then eventually you go to the bathroom. So that's the antidiuretic hormone at play there, because it's want to conserve the water and basically maintain balance of water levels in your blood. Okay, so we're going to look at, so basically this diagram tells us what happens from normal and when our water levels increase. So let's start with what happens when the water levels increase. Okay, so here we have, so that would be basically the first thing that it would happen. So if water levels increase, then that means that that's an imbalance, okay? That's an imbalance, because that would be a stimulus or an indication for your body to now undergo the negative feedback loop, okay? So if water levels increases, then the pituitary gland stops secreting ADH. So remember we said, if there's not too much water in your blood, the pituitary gland will, it will basically respond to the imbalance by stopping the secretion of ADH, because the purpose of ADH is to conserve as much water, right, in your body. But now you already have too much water in your body already because the water level increases. So it will either stop or it will secrete less ADH, okay, in order to balance the water in your body, okay. And then, so it will do that, and then the permeability of collecting ducts and distal convoluted tubules will decrease. So what do we mean by permeability? So permeability refers to how that any substance can penetrate through fully, right? So it doesn't just allow certain substances, is like a semi-permeable membrane, right? So our collecting ducts is basically, it branches from our renal tubules within the kidney, okay? So remember, from the kidney, we have what we call renal tubules. And these renal tubules, they basically serve as, they transport the already filtrated substances in your blood so that it can get rid of it, okay, once they go through the collecting duct, okay? So permeability of collecting ducts and distal convoluted tubules decreases, okay? So meaning that whatever is in the collecting ducts, okay, because your water levels have increased, right, the more water then is going to be absorbed into the collecting duct so that it can be released, okay, so that it can be released as urine in the via the process of excretion, okay. So, and then less water is reabsorbed into the blood and more water is lost, okay, because can you see that the water levels are increasing? So they are high and you want to get rid of them. You want to get rid of the, you want to restore balance. So the excess water will then leave via the urine, okay? So, and then and less water will then be reabsorbed into the blood, okay? So remember, we have the distal, we have the, it looks something like this, the nephron structure from last year. When we're looking at grade 11, we have the nephron, and it looks something like this. We have the distal convoluted tubule, and we have the proximal convoluted tubule. Proximal means that it's close to the nephron, and we also have the Bowman's capsule that looks more or less like that, okay? And then we have the glomerulus, which is inside the Bowman's capsule, and basically we have arterioles that will transfer blood into the glomerulus, and the glomerulus will act as a filtrate, and then the filtered substances are going to go through the renal tubules, and basically the renal tubules are going to act as tubules where they can either secrete certain ions that are found in the blood into the renal tubules, or they can reabsorb. So, because remember, these renal tubules are wrapped around peritubular capillaries as well, okay? So like a bed of peritubular capillaries that looks more or less like that, okay? And then these capillaries are going to secrete the ions that are in the blood into the renal tubules, and then it's going to go to the collecting duct, okay? So the collecting duct is It's basically a tubule that is branched out from the renal tubules, and the urine is going to exit from the collecting duct. Okay, so that's what you have to keep in mind when water levels are increasing. Okay, and then so this is just a nice summary of it. So you guys need to understand what happens there. And then in this case, we have osmoregulation when there's less water, okay? When the water level decreases, okay? So that's also going to be another imbalance from its normal water level. So water level decreases, and then the pituitary gland will secrete more ADH, because now obviously if the water level in your body decreases, the body will want to conserve as much water as it can and not lose any water, right? So then the permeability of collecting ducts and distal convoluted tubules increases, okay? Because now obviously the body wants more water, and so then the permeability of the collecting ducts will be so basically the body will try to conserve as much water, and more water will be reabsorbed into the blood, okay? Because no water is going to be lost, okay? So you will urinate less because obviously the water levels have decreased, so you don't want to urinate and lose more water than you would actually want to, okay? So that's very important. All right, so moving on. So we also have salt concentration, and salt concentration involves the hormones aldosterone, okay? Now salt concentration and basically the balance of water, they have a relationship, okay? So they work like antagonistic hormones that when so one thing that's very important with the hormone aldosterone is that we know that aldosterone comes from the adrenal gland, okay? So now if our salt in our blood is normal, okay, then that is homeostasis taking place, right? But let's check what would happen if there's an imbalance of salt levels in our blood, okay? So salt levels, let's start with if they increase. So increased salt in our blood will result in the adrenal gland stopping to secrete aldosterone, or it will secrete less aldosterone because already there's too much salt. There's an increase of salt in the body. So now remember, aldosterone is basically a hormone that secretes, that will, the reason why it's secreted is for more salt to enter your blood, okay? So now if you already have, let's for example say you eat food that are very high in salt, okay, then it will increase the salt in your blood, and your adrenal gland will stop secreting aldosterone or less aldosterone in order to try and balance it, and then the reabsorption of sodium ions into the blood will decreases. Now very important, salts, okay, and there are many types of salts. We have salts like potassium ions, okay, we have salts like sodium ions, and we have lots of ions. So the ones that we are focusing on are basically potassium and sodium. They fall under the category of salts. Now the interesting thing about salts is that they attract water, okay? So wherever salts are found, right, the water always follows it, okay? So think of salt as attracting water. They always attract water, okay? So wherever salt goes, water will follow. Right, so now think of it this way. So after the adrenal gland has stopped secreting or secretes less aldosterone, reabsorption of sodium ions into the blood decreases, okay? So reabsorption, what does that mean? So basically in your blood, there'll be less there'll be less sodium ions that are going to be reabsorbed or that are going to go into your blood. And then if there's less sodium ions in your blood, right, then it's going to attract less water from entering the blood. Okay. If there were more sodium ions in your blood, then it's going to attract more water into your blood. Okay. And then eventually salt level in the blood decreases and it goes back to normal. So then you see, so that's if the salt level increase and it decreases. So it works together with what we just discussed recently, like osmoregulation. Okay. And yeah, that's basically how it works. Now, what would happen if salt level in the blood decreases? Okay, the adrenal gland will secrete more aldosterone because now obviously there's a lack of salt in the blood, and then reabsorption of sodium ions increases. So your blood is going to reabsorb more sodium ions, and salt level in the blood will increase, and it will basically cause it to balance out again. Okay, so think of it this way: if salt level in the blood increases, or if the reabsorption of sodium ion increases in the blood, it's going to attract more water. So water and salt have a relationship. Okay, so if you still don't understand, I think this diagram will make it much more simpler. And this refers to, here's some terminology that we need to understand. Okay, so we have what we call so this is the process of tonicity. Okay, so there are three types of tonicity. We have isotonicity, or referred to it as isotonic, hypertonic, and hypotonic. Okay, now let's start with hypotonic. Can you see that this is basically, the balloon represents a cell? Okay, now if there are more solutes, so solids can be any type of salt. Salts can act as a solute. Okay, salts. Okay, so think of it, for example, if we have potassium ions or sodium ions, if we have more solutes inside of the cell, then more water will go in, and it will cause the cell to basically enlarge or blow up. Okay, now that's referred to hypotonicity. Hypo means low, right? Hypo means low, and now in this case they are referring to the if there's a low percentage of salt outside of the cell, then it will allow more water to actually pass through. Okay, and then here we have hypertonic. So hypertonic refers to a high amount of salt. Okay, a high amount of salt content. So if there's more solute outside of the cell, can you see those red represents the solutes? Then water will go out. So can you see from this, water always goes where the solutes are, right? So if there's more solutes inside the cell, water will go in there. If there's more solutes outside of the cell, water will leave the cell. And for example, isotonic or isotonicity is when the water and solute are equal and levels inside or outside. So there will be no movement of water. Basically, this is when it's basically at its homeostasis. Basically, homeostasis occurs here. And you want to be in this position where basically there's a balance of salt concentration within your blood. Okay, and then you'll be healthy. So isotonic is homeostasis. This is an imbalance. Hypertonic is an imbalance. Hypertonic is an imbalance, and you don't want that. Okay, so that is salt concentration. And then we have carbon dioxide concentration. So again, if there's a imbalance detected, so that would be the stimulus. It can start off with increased blood carbon dioxide levels, And then we have decreased pH, a decrease in oxygen levels. So think of it this way. Now, if we have too much carbon dioxide in our blood, it's going to decrease the pH because now the blood is going to become acidic, okay? It's going to become acidic, and the receptors in our blood, okay, will detect, and that's by means of chemoreceptors. So basically chemicals in your blood will detect the acidic environment in the blood, and then it's going to reach out to the control center. It's going to send an impulse to the medulla oblongata, which basically influences a lot of involuntary responses like the beating of your heart and also the contraction of your smooth muscles, etc. Okay, and basically that impulse is going to get carried all the way to the effector, where our effector consists of various target organs like the diaphragm, the intercostal muscles, okay? And it will force these diaphragms to either contract or relax, or the intercostal muscles to basically contract and relax, okay? And then it's going to increase the rate and depth of breathing, and it's going to help the heart muscles to also increase the heart rate. So then the cardiac muscles of the heart will beat faster, and then it's going to generate a response. So heart rate increases, and then more CO2 is removed from the body, and then blood CO2 levels fall, pH of blood returns to normal. Okay, so that is the process. That's the negative feedback for carbon dioxide concentration. So it's the imbalance starts here when there's an increase, and it's going to try and reverse that and bring it back to normal. Okay, now let's look at blood glucose levels. Can you see here we have our blood vessels, and the blood vessels consist of two types of cells. So, basically the pancreas consists of two types of cells. We have, and remember we said that the pancreas can act as both an endocrine gland as well as an exocrine gland. So an exocrine gland means that it is able to secrete digestive enzymes, and it's going to be secreted into the pancreatic duct that will help digest substances in basically food that's found in the stomach. It's going to break it down even more. Okay, and endocrine is insulin and glucagon. Those are the two hormones that it will secrete. Okay, and insulin is secreted by our alpha cells. Okay, alpha cells, and glucagon is secreted by our beta cells. Okay, beta cells. So that's basically the two types of hormones that the pancreas secretes, okay? And both of them are considered to be hormones that are involved in the endocrine system, okay? And they're going to be secreted directly into the bloodstream. As you can see, we have a blood vessel there, and these alpha and beta cells are going to secrete the insulin and glucagon. Now, one thing to note is that insulin and glucagon work antagonistically. So if the secretion of insulin increases, the secretion of glucagon decreases, and obviously vice versa. Okay, so what are the functions of insulin and glucagon? So let's look at that and how they affect what's the negative feedback. Okay, so can you see over here, we have a normal blood glucose level, and now an imbalance is detected when the high blood glucose levels occurs. For example, after you've eaten something, okay? And then the pancreas is going to secrete insulin, which is a hormone that stimulates glucose uptake by cells. So it's going to get rid of it's going to take in the glucose molecules that are present in the blood vessels, and it's going to take it or remove it, right? So in order for normal blood glucose levels to be maintained within the blood. Okay, so can you see here we have insulin, and the liver plays a very important role in insulin. Will convert glycogen. Glycogen is a stored form of glucose, right? and glycogen will then be converted back into glucose if your body needs glucose, which basically happens in the in feedback loop B. Okay, so feedback loop A is when your body already has a high glucose level, and feedback loop B is when your blood level drops, and then the pancreas then will secrete a different hormone called glucagon from the beta cells, and then it's going to stimulate the liver to convert glycogen back into glucose, so that more glucose can then be secreted back into the bloodstream in order for balance to be maintained here. Okay. Right. And then we get to thyroxine levels. So thyroxine is basically a hormone that helps control your metabolic rate. Okay. So we have what we call a basal metabolic rate, called BMR, and thyroxine levels influences your basal metabolic rate. So basal metabolic rate is your metabolic rate when you don't really do anything, or when you are at rest. Okay, when you are at rest. So now let's look at the two scenarios here. So if our thyroxine levels are low, okay, so it's first normal, and then let's, for example, say our thyroxine levels decreases. Remember, thyroxine is produced by the thyroid gland. Okay, so if our thyroxine levels decreases for some reason, and it normally decreases when we don't have enough iodine. Okay, we don't necessarily get enough iodine from our diet, and then it will cause the thyroid gland to secrete less thyroxine, and that is a condition called hypothyroidism. Okay, so if, let's for example say the thyroxine levels are very low, then it's going to inform the pituitary gland to release more thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, thyroid stimulating hormone, and thyroid gland releases. So thyroid stimulating hormone will obviously stimulate the thyroid gland to release more thyroxine, and then the thyroxine level will increase, and then it will go back to normal. Okay, so that's what happens. So normally iodine is the problem, so it means that you'll need more iodine so that your thyroid gland can secrete more thyroxine. Okay, and this is the opposite. So high thyroxine levels. So let's for example say it is normal. Okay, start here, and then thyroxine level increases. Now that's too much thyroxine, and it can lead to various disorders, which we'll look at in the next video. And the pituitary gland releases less TH because obviously there's too much thyroxine, so you don't want to overstimulate. You don't want the thyroid gland to produce too much thyroxine. Okay, so then you want it to actually release less thyroxine, and then the thyroxine level will decrease. Okay, because of the thyroid gland, and the pituitary gland will stop or releasing TSH, which is a thyroid stimulating hormone, and then it will go back to normal. Okay, right. And then we get to thermoregulation. So thermoregulation is the process whereby the body is able to control the temperature in our bodies, okay, regardless of the external environment, regardless of whether it's cold, like today was particularly very cold, but our body has amazing ability to maintain constant internal environment here. So here you have a structure of the dermis over here. The dermis is the inner part of your skin, okay, and it consists of various structures over here. We have the sweat gland, and we also have receptor cells in our dermis, and we have blood vessels, okay, and then we have sweat pores that are on the epidermis of your skin, which is like the outer part of your skin that basically protects you. So it acts like a waterproof barrier, okay, a waterproof barrier to prevent foreign substance from invading your body, okay. And the skin is the largest organ in the body. So what actually happens? So if you look at here, we have a cold environment here. So today was very cold, okay. So I'm sure most of you what happened was in your body was able to undergo thermoregulation by maintaining a constant 37 degrees Celsius internal environment. Okay, so we have two processes called vasoconstriction and vasodilation. Okay, so what happens with the blood vessels beneath in your dermis? Okay, so the blood vessels in your dermis, when it's very cold, basically receptor cells in the dermis will detect that the external environment is very cold, and what will happen is the capillaries will then constrict. Okay, we call that vasoconstriction. Vaso means vessel, and constriction means it becomes narrower. So can you see over here, these blood vessels over here, your capillaries, which is the smallest type of blood vessels, they actually become very narrow, okay, and they are near the skin surface to basically conserve heat, right? So your body's trying to warm itself up by narrowing the arteries. Okay, so the receptor cells are going to detect that, and then the blood vessels will narrow in order to conserve as much heat. Okay, so it's basically like a process of conduction. Okay, another word for that is conduction. Okay, because now you basically want to conserve as much heat as possible, okay, in your body because it's cold. And oftentimes if you're very cold, you would rub your hands together, or if your feet is very cold, you would rub them together in order to generate more heat. Okay, that's another example of conduction. Your body's tendency to want to conserve heat. Okay, and then we also have sweat secretion. So over here, you can see that, now remember, sweat is basically the body's way of losing water, okay, due to evaporation once it comes into contact with the surface of the skin. So here, sweat secretion stops, okay, so obviously because it's very cold, you can't lose any water because there's not much heat involved in such a way that it will want to get rid of heat. Okay, you're cold, so basically the sweat glands will become more dormant, or there won't be any sweat that secretion on the surface of the skin. And this is a nice example of the exocrine gland. Like the sweat gland acts as an exocrine gland, and it will then release the sweat that way, right? But in this case, it's very cold. Now, what happens if it's very hot? Okay, so obviously then your body is on fire and you want to now get rid of the heat. Okay, so what will happen to your blood vessels? Your capillaries will dilate, so that's vasodilation, and near the skin surface to lose heat to the environment. Okay, so now your body will try to lose as much heat as possible. And how does it do that? So it involves the sweat glands. So your sweat glands will begin to secrete a sweat. The sweat gland will allow water. So there'll be water in your sweat glands that will basically evaporate once it comes to contact with heat. Okay, and we call that process radiation. Okay, so radiation is a process whereby heat actually gets lost, okay, when it comes to contact from the external air in order to cool down your body. Now that's very important, to cool down your body because it's too hot. Okay, so then that process involves radiation. Okay, because the water in the sweat gland is so hot, it will come into contact with the external air and try to cool it off. Okay, and then you would often want to go outside to find cool air so that this process actually happens. So sweat glands begin to secrete sweat, causing heat loss by evaporation. Okay, right. So that's basically what we looked at. So we have thermoregulation. We have let's go back to this slide over here. So in a nutshell, we looked at all these processes. We looked at water, temperature, thyroxine, glucose, carbon dioxide, as well as salts. Okay, so I want you guys to go and make a nice, can you see this? This is a sort of like a mind map, right? Where it talks about all the types of processes such as that will require negative feedback. Okay, so you can go draw this mind map, right, and do your summary and write down notes behind each salts, water, temperature, thyroxine, glucose, to give yourself a nice summary of negative feedback, right, and all the processes that are involved that requires negative feedback. Okay, so yeah, this is going to be all for today, and in the next video we're going to be looking at, and it's going to be a shorter video, and where we look at basically the disorders that arise from if there's an imbalance with any of these processes that we've mentioned today, right? Whether it's osmoregulation, thermoregulation, etc. Okay, so we're gonna look at that in the next video. And yeah, so if you guys have any questions related to what we did today, drop a comment in the comment section, and also leave a like and subscribe and share it to everyone you know, so that more people can actually gain access to this content. Okay, so that is all from Kalinske Academy, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video and have a nice rest of your day. Okay, all right, bye bye.